Welcome everyone to this episode of your Freedom Hub's presentation of the free market cash patient. I'm your host, Jeff Cantor, along with my co-host, Charles Frohman. We have some great sponsors tonight that we'll talk about, but again, remember that the hub and the purpose of this show is to bring all the entrepreneurs, disruptors, and activists together as we try to change everything for the better. These programs are recorded, and here's the link if you are not already currently registered. Otherwise, you'll want to come to these other links by Monday morning. The current video is always posted. These are case sensitive, so be careful as far as that part goes. And talking of sponsors, one of the key ones that we've got is a Heaven Sent Hemp, and the reason why is we've discovered this is to be the only bioactive product on the market, and they're able to give us a 15% discount. And you'll see they actually have a test where you can test any product on the market against this in but a minutes, seconds, and know the difference. So you'll certainly want to take advantage of checking this out. Let's take a quick detour. I'll show you. This is one of the channels where the shows are archived, and you'll see there's a host of them in here, a wealth of things. In fact, one of the guests we've got coming up here is this one with Dr. Zelenko as an example. But there's some great ones, and none of them have become dated. They're all as current as yesterday. And then this is the site for that one sponsor of ours you'll see, and under their little videos, they've got that area where they show you how to run those challenges to determine if this thing is viable or how it compares against anything else you've been interested in or making use of. So here you'll be able to immediately prove if it works or not. Here we are at the hub. But then here's the really important breaking news. This is the marketplace for health, wealth, and freedom. This is mphealthwealthfreedom.com. As an example, this event today, and that's why I'm bringing this up, is to showcase this aspect of this, and then you'll come back and look at the rest of these tabs in here. But this is where tonight's show is being publicized, I should say. Here are the ones upcoming, and then here's some ones from in the past, and those links are right in here live. So this will be a quick, easy way and try to remember everything I showed you a minute ago. You'll just come here, and there's all sorts of interesting tabs and items under all of this stuff, and even in these expanding areas. So you'll certainly want to come back and take a look at all of that. Okay, well, let's dig in tonight because this should be exciting. So I'm going to let Charles do the honors here and introduce tonight's guest.
For sure, Jeff, and welcome, James. Dr. Lyons-Weiler is Editor-in-Chief of Science Policy, Public Health, and the Law. I think I first noticed him at one of the state hearings where mostly Democrats, maybe influenced by some pharma contributions, were forbidding K through 12 students from attending school for failure to take up to 70 doses of a dozen or more vaccines. And he was trying to offer a balanced view of the science because that is his background, and there is some corruption at CDC around the science of that whole area of medicine. And it does impact the COVID controversy because some suspect that we're extending these lockdowns until there's one of Bill Gates' vaccines. He is the CEO of the Institute for Pure and Applied Knowledge, the host of his own podcast, Unbreaking Science, and he has his own book there on autism. And we hope to hear what he has to say about a new controversy for most of us on testing. Turns out the testing has been flawed from the start, from the Centers for Disease Control, exacerbating the sabotaging of our livelihoods and the wreckage of the health system. And so Dr. Lyons-Weiler proposes a walk-away movement from CDC and some in-home testing that will have a bulletproof privacy. So we're looking forward to tonight's guest, Jeff.
Very good. All right. I would say you can take control of the screen there.
Absolutely. Thank you. So thanks for the introduction. We'll get right into it with the slideshow here. I used to be at the University of Pittsburgh. I was a senior research scientist, and I headed up their bioinformatics analysis core. I was responsible for the design and execution of over 100 research studies, and I had a staff of 5 people. I brought in $27.5 million collaborative funding in the first 3 years when I was faculty there, before I became the bioinformatics core director, because I like to help people, and I put my heart and soul into cancer research, especially biomarkers for early detection and biomarkers for predicting the outcome or the prognosis of patients. I'm really grateful to be part of the podcast, or part of this tonight, Jeff and Charles and everyone. I'm very grateful. You just saw the IPAK website. This is where you can find our publications. The research that we do at IPAK is 100% funded by the public, and we do peer-reviewed publications. We have various publications on the accumulation and clearance of aluminum from the CDC's vaccination schedule, as well as publications showing which proteins are likely to be autoimmune targets due to molecular mimicry between the proteins that are in COVID, the virus, and human proteins. So we're very, very, very active. The podcast that you mentioned is called Unbreaking Science. You can find it on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. And we have a whole library of videos and discussions. They're long format discussions with a wide variety of people from all walks, but we tend towards the science end of things. The goal of Unbreaking Science is to do what the title says. We're going to put science back on the track of objectivity in spite of profit pressures and perverse incentives. So please do check us out there. When the mainstream news has reported that the government has failed us, there's literally nothing more that I have to say. I mean, you might have opinions about Wall Street Journal and agendas and phase 1 and phase 2 projects that certain entities might have, but nevertheless, the Wall Street Journal has told the American public a long time ago, this says one day ago, that's the screen cap, but that America needed coronaviruses and the government failed us, that they need coronavirus tests. And we know that the testing has limitations due to the fact that you just can't always detect everything. China, which used antibody-based tracking when they got that online, and then they went to PCR testing, they missed 86% of all the COVID-19 cases in China, which means that we really don't have an idea just by the pickup kind of testing in the emergency phases of an outbreak about the size and scope of the spread of a virus like COVID-19. And if we woefully underestimate, then we may be closer to herd immunity than anyone might have expected. I don't have time tonight to go into herd immunity. I just did a deep dive on it, and I'll be doing a podcast on it sometime soon. But this is the study that showed 86% undocumented infection. There's a problem in the way that the public health facilities and the press are discussing COVID cases. There's a serious problem in that they confuse the presence of a virus as an outcome of a test with infection, a viable infection. And there's studies of children that just go in and survey healthy children and look for viruses in the nasopharyngeal tract and the throat, the sputum. Everyone's filled with viruses during the school year, and a wide variety of viruses. So the presence of a virus doesn't mean that you're sick from that virus, especially if you're immune. You may be currently fighting it off successfully. And the other side of the coin there of the confusion is the difference between an infection that is an infection, a run-of-the-mill infection, which happens all the time, and a disease caused by the virus. If you're immune to it, you successfully fight it off. That involves an infection. That immunity, either from a past infection or immunization, does not put a plastic shield around you that protects you from exposure to the virus. And so when they do whole population testing or screens or large amounts of testing on everyone to see if they have the virus, they may be picking up people who just picked up the virus 15 minutes ago. They are immune and they will never develop it. In order to spread the virus, you have to have high viremia. And so the presence of the virus in the nasopharyngeal tract is not evidence that you are spreading it or that you're at risk of even developing spreading it. Politico covered the problem with the testing, how early testing failures allowed coronavirus to spread. Again, these are not, some back alley publications. The story is that the actual history, I should say, is that CDC actually declined a perfectly laboratory validated PCR test, RT-PCR test that was developed by Germany. 41 other countries adopted it. It was available January 17th, 2020. The CDC declined the offer from the World Health Organization in Germany to adopt that test. It was already laboratory validated, where they knew the sensitivity of the test, they knew the specificity of the test, they knew the pathogen specificity of the test, because they created oligonucleotides in the lab to test their test kit against for sensitivity by spiking sputum samples. And they did a great job. And they had other people that were sick. They had sputum samples from laboratory stored samples of people that were sick from non-coronavirus samples, but they had respiratory illnesses. It was 100% specific for coronavirus. It never picked up a false positive. And so I'm not going to read the political expert, but people at the CDC, when they're talking about the coronavirus test, they've given so many different stories about what's wrong with the test. Remember that the CDC had an exclusive monopoly on PCR testing in the United States for the month of February and March until until March, when FDA said, okay, we're going to allow emergency use authorization of tests from corporations as well. Well, this was after we were already told that, yes, there's a problem with the test. The early problem with the test was just dismissed by Anthony Fauci, who attributed it in an interview, saying it was a technical glitch that slowed things down in the beginning. Nobody's fault. Wasn't any bad guys there. It just happened. This is a non-explanation about exactly what's wrong with the test. And he also told Science Magazine, we'll have to wait until it's over and look back, because in the fog of war, you really can't troubleshoot. This man is responsible for us not understanding what's wrong with the CDC test. And so if you go into the interviews, when he says, oh no, absolutely, like this with Hugh Hewitt in March, this has nothing to do with anybody's fault, certainly not President Trump's fault. It's a hot potato. Chris Meekins came out. He's a former assistant secretary of the HHS, and he said that the CDC actually lied to Secretary Azar about the performance of the test and the availability and their ability to ramp up sufficient testing. And he implied, Chris Meekins said that means that they lied to the President of the United States. And the nation got weeks behind in testing. Now, at the beginning of an outbreak, weeks behind in testing is everything. And the reason that we destroyed our economy, the reason that we have hundreds of thousands of businesses that are shut down, 50% of which will never see the light of day again, is because the CDC didn't know how to make a test for coronavirus. The problem is in 2003, when SARS came around, which is also the coronavirus, it's the sister to SARS-CoV-2, they created a test, and on their website they boast that with the SARS outbreak, they were responsible for shutting it down in Canada because they provided the accurate testing with RT-PCR. They provided the contact tracing. So what happened in the CDC between 2003 and 2020? It's a mystery about how they got it wrong. And if you dig around and you try to find out what their excuses are, the reasons, initially they said that some specimens must have been labeled. Then they attributed it to a flawed component that was shipped in the kits. What had happened was they shipped these kits out, and the people that were doing the diagnosis said on radiology, we're seeing the glass-like opacities in the lung all the way to the periphery. So the radiologic assay said, yeah, this is COVID-19. And the symptoms said it. The progression of the disease said it. So based on symptomology, it said it, but their molecular test, they were missing patients that were clearly COVID-19 testing. Now, CDC also hesitated because they wanted to make a test that tested for SARS, MERS, and SARS-CoV-2, making it more complex. There was certainly an insufficient number of tests very quickly. They reported that there were going to be, they were concerned about false positives. They came up with this story that the test actually was so sensitive that somebody that was carrying a a positive test sample across the laboratory 15 minutes prior to running a test on a negative sample would cause that sample to become a positive. That's baloney. In the lab, when you carry samples across the room, they're covered. Universally, they're covered. You don't walk around like a pot of stew, carrying specimen samples around and tripping over chairs and things. You're also working in a negative pressure hood. And further, there's no such thing scientifically as a PCR test that's too sensitive. There may be off-target amplification where the PCR test is not designed accurately and it may be actually amplifying human samples or maybe amplifying another pathogen's nucleotide sequence. But in this case, saying that the test was so sensitive that another coronavirus in a vial being walked across the room would cause the false positives is baloney. It's unacceptable that CDC is attributing it without giving any real answers. We saw patients in San Antonio that CDC released on the basis of their test that turned up positive for infection later. Actually, 122 were released at that time, and then with Grand Princess Cruise, they disembarked all the passengers, and they tried to relocate these passengers, 3,500 of them, that had tested negative, to a mall in San Antonio. And the mayor of San Antonio said, no, you're not going to put them in the mall. They ended up putting them in a military location, but nevertheless, they went on to go out to their lives, and they mingled with the public, they mingled with their families, and they spread coronavirus because their negative test was false. There were health professionals that came out and said that there's a problem with testing, there's a problem, with that, and they were silenced. Nevertheless, the media tracked it and reported it. This is March 17th. They compared the testing rates in the United States. So all the measures of success in terms of testing became public, and it's clear that they didn't have a viable testing program. And I can go on and on and on. There's plenty of coverage. Mercury News. If you look at the CDC's website and you look at their description, there's no statement of concern. There's no limitations whatsoever, other than, well, you can't really attribute a negative test as a negative test. Well, what kind of test is that then? They did say on the website that there was a problem with the test, and new tests were going to be distributed once the issue has been addressed. So they finally came out and said at the end of March, yes, okay, there's a problem. They also then very quickly announced that what you're supposed to do with this test is ignore one of the results of the reaction. So they had multiple primer sets. I analyzed the primer sets. I saw the problem with the primer sets. I sent a notice of concern to the FDA. They thanked me for it and said that they were going to send that to their team. Nevertheless, if you have a flawed ket and then you say to the people running the ket, just ignore this part of it. Well, then, the CDC is responsible for validation of all of these clinical tests for pathogens around the country. If it's a reportable pathogen, it's a reportable infection. There's instructions on how the infectious substance, the sample, the sputum sample, or so on, should be packaged. It has to go to the CDC. They're going to test it. What are they going to use to test it? They're going to use their test. So if their test is not accurate, then what can we do? They have guidance for Ebola testing, right? So that's their job. It turns out that some renegade organizations decided ahead of time to say it really doesn't matter what CDC says or does. We're developing our own test. We have to look after numero uno. We have to look after our own interests and our patients, and we're going to develop a test no matter what they say. Fast forward to July 17th, Dr. Sinhan Lee in Milford, Connecticut. He was shipped sample sets. These are reference sample sets of clinical samples from patients that had both a clinical diagnosis and they were tested using the gold standard CDC test. These reference sample sets are supposed to be used by a laboratory to validate their test for FDA emergency use authorization and ultimately for FDA licensing. But Dr. Lee is a very, very intelligent man and a very thorough scientist. And he decided that he was actually going to sequence the PCR product that came out of the test, which means he was going to determine the nucleotide sequence of the product created by the PCR reaction from his test to see what was in the sample. Was his test amplifying or not amplifying human DNA? Was it amplifying, not amplifying, the viral DNA, or the viral nucleotide, I should say. and you need that information both for sensitivity and specificity. So if the PCR test says, yes, this person has a SARS-CoV-2 PCR product, the amplification reaction worked, you don't know what that product is just by looking at a number on a machine. We're looking at a bar on a gel. I'm old school. I've developed PCR kits myself. I don't know how the CDC got it wrong. It's impossible to get this kind of a test wrong. But his publication found that the CDC corona test kits, these are the reference samples, 1 out of 4 of the samples were wrong because they actually generated 30% false positive and 20% false negative. And I learned about this because I was tapped by a journal to review his paper. I recently had Dr. Lee on the podcast on Breaking Science, and we went over in detail. The fact that reference samples that are labeled CDC positive are not actually positive for the virus, and reference samples that are labeled CDC negative may in fact have the virus, that's what his results show, means that all the people developing tests around the country have to match their test to the CDC's poor test, or they won't get emergency use authorization. This is the publication. It's very technical, very detailed. Dr. Lee has now confirmed other reference sets. He has sourced the reference sets from other locations, and he's finding the same problem. So it wasn't just that he got an unlucky reference set collection to test. This wasn't so long ago. I think it was about a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago. Time's flying by here, but in an interview, an appearance on CNN Health, Sanjay Gupta relayed a story that the night before this interview, he was interviewing Dr. Robert Redfield, who's the director of the CDC, and Redfield allegedly told him, according to Gupta, this is all on the video, it's all available on the web, that we need a viable coronavirus testing program in the United States. This is the director of the CDC saying this. And for Sanjay Gupta to then spill the beans about this the next day is incredible. For Redfield to say it is even more incredible. Gupta's reaction was, "You've got to be kidding me." So that brings us to, the end of the PCR problem. PCR testing is absolutely an untenable prospect, and yet they're still doing it all across the country as if there's not a problem. People's lives are being disrupted as if a PCR test positive means that you have the virus, or worse, that you have COVID-19. The actual diagnosis is made on the basis of a screen. And most people who have been in medicine in terms of diagnosis, pathological diagnostics or biomarkers and so on, they know you don't do a CT scan on every person every year because you'll find so many false positives so that you'll be doing so many biopsies and follow-up procedures that it's unethical because of the risks associated with the biopsies, let's say. So you have to do diagnosis first, and then you have some diagnostics, some symptoms first, like a fever or so on, dry cough, and then you do testing. Otherwise, you're just going to get so many false positives that you're going to disrupt lives. When you disrupt one life with a COVID-19 test result, you disrupt however many numbers of people were in contact with that person for the past, 4, 5, 10 days. And so right from the beginning, I was an early proponent of immunoglobulin testing. Now, the storyline goes that antibodies that are produced from a reaction to the virus, they are produced, but they only last for about 3 months. Which, I'm mostly interested in knowing whether a person has coronavirus, if that person wants to know. I'm interested in providing, the ability of a person to get tested like they would for paternity, like they would for pregnancy, like they would for drug testing, like they would for, there's a whole list of things that you can test for yourself at home. You can take your temperature in the morning and see if you could get your kids a temperature in the morning and see if you can go to school. You don't report that temperature to the health department. Right from the beginning, I was a proponent of private, 100% rock solid private testing in home. You don't report it to anyone. You go to the drugstore, you pick it up, you bring it home, you do a little blood prick, and then you can know your status. And the first test that I learned about was Biomedomics. It's a Korean company. Well, that wasn't going to fly in the United States because they're going to want to use a United States-based test. And so there was a rush to build tests, but the procedure is very simple. You can take a blood draw or a blood prick for some of the tests. You put the blood sample on a well on the device, you add a reagent, you wait, and just like a pregnancy test, you look at to see whether you have 1, 2, or 3 lines. Very simple procedure. Almost anyone can do it. Parents can do it for their children and so on. It's so easy to interpret. And the thing that's what I was most interested in is how many people, would like to know that they're IgM positive, which means that you have an immunoglobulin that tells you that you have recently, very recently, had an exposure, potentially an active infection, as opposed to the IgG, which says that you might be immune. And if you have IgM and IgG both, you have something close to like a very similar or active infection, and you have antibodies, which is totally possible. So this being a rapid 15-minute test helped Korea keep their numbers down. Vibrant America, if someone were to press me based on the research that I've done, looking into it, Vibrant America, and I have no financial interest whatsoever in any of this. Vibrant America has a test for $119, but it's not private. It's a blood drop test. Their antibody-based test is 98% sensitive, 98% specific in the lab with materials that are known to be from people that actually had the virus. And so the trick to Vibrant America's accuracy is that they use 7 different biomarkers. They use 7 different independent assays in one kit. It's brilliant. And I've been in discussions with them right from the beginning as soon as I learned about them, based on their FDA emergency use authorization application that they sent in, to try to get them to petition FDA to allow private use of their test. In the meantime, their statistics are just, I'm not going to go into the details here of the review, but their statistics are very, very good. The sensitivity and specificity is just fantastic. So that's the truth table on their evaluation. And so where do we stand with respect to private testing? Well, people that have private practices, they can certainly order a test. And I know some physicians are writing up waivers, disclaimers, basically giving their patients back the HIPAA privacy, that if you take this test in my office, no one in this office is going to look at the results. The results are going to be sent to you, and they never came. But we'll do the phlebotomy, and we'll hook you up with the test, and we'll allow you to bill through. But we aren't going to store your result. We don't want to know. You cannot tell us the results. If you tell us the results, then we terminate, the relationship kind of thing. And this, I think, is in place in some places. I'm not going to tell you who, but that was the piece of information I wanted to grab before we got started. And I got a test back instead of the phone call that yes, indeed, there's a very well-respected physician that I know right now that does independent private testing in their practice to allow people to determine, hey, I think I've been exposed. I would like to know for myself. Should I visit grandma? Should I not visit grandma? I don't want to spread it to my loved ones. Do I have to self-isolate? Do I start a treatment protocol? So this self-guided wellness. This is, COVID-19 is such a trivial virus to treat when it comes to early cases. Our journal, Science, Public Health Policy, and the Law has a clinical research section, and we published a protocol by Dr. David Brownstein in Michigan that uses high-dose vitamin A, high-dose vitamin D, high-dose vitamin C, and others. And it uses, he doesn't use selenium. There's some other things in his protocol. I'll send it to Charles, and maybe you can share the paper around. 107 patients were given this protocol due to COVID-19 diagnosis in Dr. Brownstein's practice, and no one died. And only 2 people, one person was hospitalized on the core protocol that got the full suite of treatment, or therapy, I should say. And all told, in the whole cohort, only 3 people were hospitalized. So compared to the national trends, people being thrown on ventilators and dying on ventilators because their lung tissue can't handle the pressure and so on. I interviewed Dr. Brownstein on Breaking Science in great detail, so take a look there as well. But it's my contention, I've come to the conclusion that enough is more than enough. With everything that I just showed you with CDC, with coronavirus testing, the 156,000 deaths that we've seen in the United States are attributable to everything that's wrong with the CDC. There's financial entanglements, everything that's wrong with the FDA. They get most of their money from fees from pharmaceutical companies, their clients basically asking them for approval of their drugs, and everything that's wrong with the NIAID, who, they're supposed to be interested in allergic diseases. They don't seem to be interested in that at all. They're interested in infectious diseases. That seems to be where the money is. The irony is that CDC was created in 1946 to ward off the spread of malaria across the United States, and practically no one knows about any malaria vaccines. So how did the CDC successfully prevent the spread of malaria? They used hydroxychloroquine. The mechanisms of action of hydroxychloroquine are extremely well known. It's extremely well characterized. It's been used on over 50 million people. It's been used in 2005. There was a study that showed that it was a potent inhibitor of cellular entry for SARS-CoV-2. Well, that's what hydroxychloroquine does. It actually, stops the virus from leaving the cell. You can't bud off. There's a process that the drug actually inhibits cells from budding off viruses. So it traps the virus like it's in a prison. It stops viral replication and so on. So the mechanisms are well known, and it's a big mystery to me, understanding the systems biology, molecular biology, cellular pathophysiology, infectious disease, and everything I know about why hydroxychloroquine is not more often used. There's 66 studies that show hydroxychloroquine. The balance of the studies show that hydroxychloroquine is effective if it's used early with zinc, as you may know. It's not effective in late stage coronavirus, and there's one study that was fraudulent that actually used made up data to show that in the Lancet, it was published in the Lancet to show that hydroxychloroquine had an increased risk of mortality. That study was pulled, and yet the FDA still pulled the emergency use authorization for hydroxychloroquine, citing that study, but saying, yes, we're citing the study. However, that really hasn't influenced our decision making, which is baloney. There's pressure there. So it's time to reboot public health. This is a total redo of how we structure. And I'd like to take a minute to describe this reboot. I wrote this article today, inspired by Charles's invitation to do this. And my idea has been in my mind for some time. I gave it a name today. I call it semi-autonomous, adaptively flexible research science. What I envision are semi-autonomous nodes of research focused on assessing, imagining, and creating solutions to biothreats in the United States. They're not allowed to research with each other. Collaboration is taboo. They have to work independently, and you'll see why in a moment. They're funded by the government. They're not funded by CDC. They're not funded by HHS. They're funded by Congress, in my mind, to replace these entities, where the regulatory agencies have no business doing research, in my mind, whatsoever. This is a multiple layer neural network. The safer research networks would be the first input layer, where they're creating the knowledge about assessing what the risks are from bioweapons and emerging diseases. And they provide a report to all the Senate committees. Each and every standing Senate committee gets the report. And they sort through the report, and they look at the options of the problems and the solutions. And each Senate committee then writes up their own report, which goes to the Senate Intelligence Committee. So these are now Senate Intelligence Committee members at the hidden layer 2. And they actually discuss and prioritize what the viable options are for a problem. And then they inform the President of the United States of their decision of what the options are that should be prioritized and acted upon. They don't advise, they inform. Now the beauty here, and you can read about in the article, there's a number of great benefits. It depoliticizes the process, right? You can't have the development of any political bias in this process. You have autonomous research networks that don't answer to anyone for the research they do. They can publish the results or not publish the results. If it's state secret, they should probably, if it's sensitive information, they don't want to generate a nightmare list of things that could happen and publish them and inspire terrorists, let's say. Hollywood does a fine job at that, right? But they don't have to apply for funding. These are 80 nodes distributed geographically across the country. It's not smart to have all of our bioweapons defense strategy, if you will, located in one geographic location. So we distribute it across the landscape. And all of their good ideas are reported, like I said, to each individual Senate committee that takes all the needs of all of the needs of the country into consideration, including the attendant negative consequences of those proposed solutions. So the staffers, they would be looking into what are the economic consequences. What are the unintended deaths, deaths of despair, everything we've learned, and others. Well, how does it affect our ability to conduct trade and so on? That's why it's the Senate committees. And then those Senate committees would issue their own independent report to the Senate Intelligence Committees. And it's a distillation and a refinement of knowledge, just like any learning system. This is an adaptively flexible learning system. And I think it's a much more intelligent way to go about structuring this important aspect of what we're doing when it comes to public health. It's not just biothreats either. This could be what's making Americans so sick. Why are they developing diabetes? Why are they developing heart disease? Why are they so sick? It formalizes a process and puts it in a place where prevention is not the only potential solution. These individual nodes, these research nodes, could actually come up with any number of solutions to a perceived threat. And that's why I'm calling for a walk away from CDC, walk away from FDA, walk away from NIAID, and I'm going to throw NIH in there for good measure as well. If we defunded NIH and redistributed all of those funds to major research universities, any one that can qualify to apply for NIH extramural funding, and change it all into extramural funding, the NIH would no longer get the lion's share of the bulk of the funding, the cream of the crop, and all the research in biomedicine in the United States would have to go through peer review. The research at the NIH right now is not peer reviewed. The people who have research programs there simply tell their director the amount of money they need that year. It's not subject to critical evaluation, nothing intelligent about it. And I know this because people that have left NIH and come into academia fall flat on their face because they actually fall into a competitive environment. They can't believe how difficult it is. They're like people that never learned how to swim. They drown unless their hands are held very closely by their directors of their departments and so on, deans of schools of medicine. So I'm 100% serious about this walk away movement. I'm not saying that we should ignore the regulatory aspects of these agencies, but they certainly should not be involved in the construction of solutions. They've proven to be very, very bad at it. It has been lethal, both in terms of human lives, massive amounts of pain and suffering. It's too slow to react. And we could have a very smart system that involves pulses through that neural network. That becomes a very refined process. Everybody knows their job. There's a discussion, but not a lot of, overt debate, and it's apolitical from that perspective. And that's what I thought I'd share with you guys today.
Very good. Well, I appreciate that quite a bit. A couple of kudos there. One, to the idea of the walk away, because that is the essence of this show, the cash patient. As I walk away from government, insurance, and all of these other interferers in my life and decisions. And like you said, look at how much money they squander, forgetting all the harm they maybe do, just the wasted cash that could be powered by people that have good solutions and so on. And then also kudos to Charles, who's just got his hand up with a quick question here, because you're also the embodiment of what we're also stimulating between this and the Freedom Hub mentality, is to create some synergies to other things that we can do collectively to move this ball forward. Sort of, I don't know, for our own individual purposes, but we still need to band together to kind of make it happen. So I really appreciate that. So on that note, Charles, congratulations, and ask the first question.
Thanks, Jeff. And for anyone else participating, click the raise hand icon and think of some questions for Dr. Lyons-Weiler. That was incredible, James. What a great idea to distribute research away from some of the captured bureaucracies. I recall when I was working in Congress in the 90s, my boss was chair of the Biomedical Research Caucus, and we had so many great presentations back then. I was in my 20s, so I didn't understand half of it. Maybe as much as those NIH bureaucrats understand when they have to compete, when they get real jobs in the universities. Assuming it's slow to get in-home private testing going, although we'll do whatever we can to get the word out, how Orwellian do you think it's going to get, looking at the glass half empty, if more folks don't question the narrative and start listening to alternative sources of information, because it is looking pretty scary out there?
So the first thing I'll say is that the lead sell of this idea is that it will meet the demand, that a free open market on in-home private testing, the companies will be able to get the investment in to be able to create these kits and distribute them much faster than a top-down model of anything from the government, right? We know this just on first principles of how the government operates. I think I know it's going to be, absolutely Orwellian. The public is primed to believe, for instance, that wearing a paper-thin mask is that there's a small chance of them helping someone else, that you're actually doing some good. But the CDC doesn't tell them it's supposed to be 16 layers of a mask. That's on their website. If you go and look at what they actually recommend, they say wear a mask, any kind of mask, pull your shirt up over your nose, doesn't matter. And yet, with hydroxychloroquine, there's so much science that shows that it's effective. You look at the science on cloth masks; they don't do anything outside of the healthcare. And so, I think it would be a fascinating adventure to have a debate with someone. Pick a side. Is it more like Orwell? Is it more like Aldous Huxley? Is it Brave New World, or is it 1984? And work out exactly what's happening in here in a public forum, an open, televised debate on that, to get down to the nitty gritty of, and that would be a good forum to amplify the message that you're being lied to, and here are the ways that you're being lied to, and you can relate to that because Orwell told you or Aldous Huxley told you that this is what they're going to do. They're going to require testing for the workplace. The HIPAA rights are gone for the workplace. Your boss can know that you're sick with COVID-19, for instance. But I can imagine an American system that actually says, we're going to change labor laws. Every worker can have two 2-week sick periods with no, don't ask, don't tell. That would more than suffice, or 2 10-day periods. It's now 10 days. That would more than suffice the need for people to self-isolate without asking any questions. They have 2 of them, and the fact that your employer can fire you if you refuse to test for this is completely unacceptable. So there's a lot of work to do. We need to get the HIPAA relaxation reversed. We also need then to get the FDA to allow in-home private testing results of antibody or PCR if somebody comes up with a smart 15-minute PCR test that you can run in your home. I don't think they could do that, though, right now. So the masks are programming individuals to do what's necessary, minor inconvenience for the greater good, and that will be just like you knew that you should mask, you should take this vaccine that's coming. My research priorities became how bad could it possibly be if we vaccinate everybody in the population. We're going to find everybody in the population that's going to develop autoimmunity from SARS-CoV-2 proteins, as opposed to an infection that might get 60% of the people, hit 60% of the people. It doesn't have an adjuvant, which is a problem because adjuvants induce autoimmunity. It's extremely top-down control, and in top-down control, I think when people look at Huxley and they look at George Orwell, those were both centered around structured societies where the party, right, was the entity. Here it's corporatism. It's not the party. The corporations that run our government are the issue. It's that relationship. So if you want to change this, you have to really redo campaign finance reform, limit the amount of finance money that can come from corporations, limit direct-to-consumer marketing for pharma. Just we need to cut off those unhealthy ties and disentangle what I call corporate fascism. If I argue with my my sons about this, are now young adults, about this definition of fascism. But what's the difference if the government runs the corporations and it's a top-down power structure versus if the corporations run the government and it's a top-down power structure? I see no difference whatsoever. One just has the American label on it, the other one has another label on it. So there's a revolution coming that everybody feels that society is going to be reboot one way or the other. We would like to know that people have a say, more of a say, where people that are know better know that the odds are stacked against that outcome. And so standing up for your personal rights, for the right to say no, the bodily autonomy right, the right to know what you're being given in a drug, or the right to know what's inside something that's injected into you, all of that has to be sacrosanct. And if you're not an anti-vaxxer, which I'm certainly not, I believe that we can do a much better job of making vaccines safe, because I believe in human approaches to technology. I have confidence in that. But the profit motive stops us from doing it, it's clear. But if you're not an anti-vaxxer, but you won't take every vaccine that they want you to take over the next 5 years, I don't know what you're going to call yourself. If you don't want everything but the HPV vaccine, that puts you in the camp of being anti-vaxxer once the government pulls the label out. That label itself is nothing more than a whip that they put you on a post and whip you with. That's all it is. It's just the label is an attempt to control. I'm defending science. I'm defending freedom. I'm not pro this or pro that or anything. I'm pro-human and pro-human health and pro-environment, and I want a clean planet, and I want a good place for my kids to raise their kids now. So I think people are waking up by the millions. By the millions, we're actually seeing a major wake up here. And so I think it could be very, very bad. I'm reluctant to make that emphasis simply because I don't like to motivate people out of fear. But it's time to start clanging the bell. If the house is on fire, the alarm should go off, and I think the house is on fire.
Well, it's important to bring that up for sure, because you're right, and the fact you said you're emphasizing your point is we just need to withdraw, because it's going to be really hard to force people to do stuff if everybody doesn't show up. Yeah. So you're only a leader as long as you have followers. If we all just walk away, then they can lead themselves in their bedroom all by their lonesome, type of a thing. So I hear you loud and clear. Is there anything underway to kind of address like any legislation or any things other than just people waking up on any particular solution or avenue that you mentioned?
There are some initiatives that are underway. I'm involved in a large number of different initiatives to move the needle, so to speak. But we're at the point where we need to smash the clock, and we can't move the needle. There's a time frame here. For political reasons, the Trump administration is supporting the warp speed initiative to try to allegedly have an October surprise. For other reasons, Fauci prefers to skip the animal studies as a shortcut and combine phase 2 and 3 as a shortcut to try to get this done. He attributes that to political pressure as well, but really there's a race to market. And the initiatives that I'm familiar with involve getting the FDA to reverse their position on the emergency use authorization for hydroxychloroquine. That would be very important, because if there's a viable alternative to a vaccine, then people can say no thank you to the vaccine, I'll take the hydroxychloroquine if I get sick. That's how the emergency use authorization criteria fall out. Another one obviously is to petition the FDA to allow in-home private testing. And none of the companies want to stick their head up and get it chopped off. They're afraid. So if they're afraid to actually do the right thing, the obvious thing, the thing that would allow them to really enjoy a very prosperous business initiative, to have hundreds of millions of tests done every year in home by rational acting American citizens, well, then that comes to the people to actually make that petition. And we're approaching the point where I think we have the full story enough, and enough people are aware that where a petition would matter. If the petitions fail, then it's a matter of taking it into the courtroom and suing for the human rights that we were born with, the natural rights that we're born with. And so then that's a totally different matter that we won't get into, but it involves finding the people that have standing and so on, and what courts to go into and all the rest. So there's definitely a landscape of opportunity here, but it's on short order.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with that short order side of it. Joe, I think you got your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Dr. James, for an incredibly valuable seminar. The CDC itself has released data showing that the virus is less dangerous than the flu for people under 65. Based on that, I think the establishment media is simply running a huge fear campaign. I'm concerned that we may not be able to educate people fast enough to allow them to regain their sanity. And I'm wondering about your thoughts on steps towards either secession or local power initiatives at either a county or a state level.
That's a good point. So the Allegheny County Board of Health tried to pass a mandate for the HPV vaccine for all children entering 7th grade. I was pulled into this by some local activists to represent science in my testimony, and I was in the courtroom, and I was noticing that they actually violated Open Meetings Act procedure by proceeding with discussions without putting it to a vote. So knowing the rules as well as I did on open meetings for some reason, I don't know why, it stuck with me. There was a motion to have, there was a motion, the motion was seconded before the chair could call for the vote. That's when I raised my hand. It took the Allegheny County Board of Health a year to figure out a way to get around that, because they desperately did not want an open discussion on HPV vaccination problems. And so it took them a year, they turfed it to committee. And a year later, they let a local radio personality let out that they have something planned for the quote-unquote anti-vaxxers this week coming up in the Allegheny County Board of Health, and that he was going to be there and he was going to testify with his wife. And we all went there. He wasn't there. It was very strange. He never showed up. They decided to do a non-binding recommendation that all children of all ages going to any school in any county in Pennsylvania receive the HPV vaccine. So I did the same thing. They didn't call for discussion. It was on the agenda, but they're supposed to call for a discussion. It was on the agenda. And I waited until the call for the vote. The chair and the vice chair of the meeting started yelling at me to sit down, that they were going to have me forcibly removed. They motioned for the guard to get me, to take me away from the meeting. Well, the people around me, of course, put it on a blog that night, and then I turned around and I sued them. I raised $15,000 and I sued them in court. I think it was about a week after they received the papers for the lawsuit that they contacted my lawyers and offered to settle, which I gladly did. And I had a judge, I didn't want any compensation. I had the judge rule that their vote was, what's it called? Void. It was void ab initio or whatever. It was null and void ab initio. In other words, it never took place, and that both parties agreed that no one was at fault. So sometimes we have to just make a phone call, right? Sometimes it's another story I'll tell you. What I'm saying is that sometimes the solutions are as light as a feather. There were some activists that called me and they said, listen, Dr. Jack, there's a renegade. This was after the Obama administration came into region. The Obama administration was on its way out and the Trump administration came in. And there was a rogue HHS official who decided to put out a letter in the mass confusion of the chaos of switching administrations. She put out a letter in Region 5 to all nursery schools that you have to have the children up to date on the CDC schedule, or you're going to be shut down because you're not allowed to have unvaccinated children in your nursery schools. And there was no change in policy. There was no announcement. There was nothing. And it's just she was reinterpreting the policy. And so they contacted me and they said, should we protest? Do we sue? What do we do? I said, just write a letter to the new director of the HHS and ask for policy clarification. The letter came back to us that said, you are right, she's wrong. We want to assure you that there is no plan in Section 5 or any other of the sections in the United States, Region 5, sorry, or any other regions of the United States to require vaccination for entry into preschool. So we'd like to see, some big flashy solutions that actually matter and happen. The ICANN Decide Network managed to petition rather quietly. I didn't even hear about it, the FDA, to make sure that the research that was done on the Moderna vaccination included a saline placebo instead of another vaccine as the placebo, and they succeeded. So I'm just going to say death by a thousand cuts. Do every little thing that you can think to do to try to push in the right direction. We're all pushing in the same direction. All of us are pushing in the same direction. There's no time to debate which strategy is best or superior, or are they going to outsmart us, or are we falling for a trap? Use all of the tools that you have, and this is why I think we need to reform education as well. I mean, when the dust settles on the American civilization, I want to give a presentation called Plan B on the reboot. How are we going to redo it? We need to teach civics in schools. There's so many ways that we need to change people's awareness of the power that they do have to stand up for themselves and for others. You can sue government officials. You just have to know how. You just have to know that they can be sued for not doing their job, for instance. So there's a lot of tools that we have at our disposal that are really, really smart, really super effective, and they're unmistakably more powerful than even this big momentum.
Yeah, no, it's good. And you open up a Pandora's box of things like school and everything else for sure that we need to deal with. But that death by a thousand paper cuts is an analogy I've always loved to use. And that's all part of that whole walk away mentality. If every individual just pokes at it in their own way, instead of like, what do I join? Can't I sign a petition? No, just go do whatever. Like you said, I sued him and this person did that. After a while, they can't stand the assault either. And then others start to pick up on it and off we go. We got time for one good quick question and a quick response. Kishore, I see you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Jeff. So my question is, you just mentioned that you're trying to restore the emergency use of HCQ, and it's, I believe it's already been done by this Henry Ford complex of hospitals who presented data to prove that HCQ works. So far, to my knowledge, it's fallen on deaf ears.
Well, Anthony Fauci heard it, and Anthony Fauci responded. Anthony Fauci said specifically that the HCQ study at Henry Ford in Michigan had a problem. He said it's a problem because those patients also got corticosteroids. And then he said, and we know from another study that corticosteroids help improve the outcome of COVID-19. And so he said that it's a problem. It's a peer-reviewed study. Doesn't matter. This was an online interview. It doesn't matter that it's a peer-reviewed study. You can peer review bad things. It's bad science. So he's rejected that. And then Henry Ford was slapped. They were slapped on the wrist and told to shut down discussion of it. I have no idea if they have a don't ask, don't tell policy. They may be treating with hydroxychloroquine every day, and I hope they are. But we don't hear them saying that, we don't care what Anthony Fauci says. We don't care what the FDA says. We're going to do our own thing. They certainly should, and I hope they do. I may have missed any news story that's coming out saying they did. But the last I heard that they were actually in public criticizing their own research. So that bid has not succeeded. We need every American citizen that knows what they know to don't put it on Twitter, don't put it on Facebook, don't put it on LinkedIn, don't put it anywhere in social media. Put it in a letter and address it to the commissioner of the FDA and CC Secretary Azar. Fill their inboxes, their mailboxes with tons of letters. Nobody writes letters anymore. Don't use email. If we get the address in enough people's hands, we can push them to the point where this is a serious problem. If they got 180,000 letters on hydroxychloroquine, then they know they're in for a fight with the vaccine. You see, so we do each and every person has to do this. Don't wait for somebody else to write a petition. Write out what you know. Go study it yourself and read my blog articles on it and everybody's blog articles. Go watch my podcast, take notes, and Write for yourself. Write it out for yourself. Write it in crayon. It doesn't matter. Get it in the mail.
James, that was fantastic. And unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time slot here, but we're going to let everyone share this video when it's released, and we'll have some links to the things you've described in the credits. So we'll be able to take advantage of that as well. As we conclude here, definitely wanted to kind of tell you about what we've been working on in that death by 1,000 cuts capacity, and that is the idea of this cash pay app. This is our way of helping break the back of healthcare in America. It's one thing to have money to pay for needs and services, but how do we liberate the market? And that's what this little tool does. It lets any doctor post their pricing, has to be all in and cash oriented, and then the person, when they book it, have to pay for it at the time that they book it. And when you see the doctor, the money's released. No coding, no waiting, no third-party interference. So it's a small way, but it's a small tool. But the nice thing is it allows, whenever he says, well, how can I sign for a petition or whatever? Yeah, well, here, this is a real easy thing you can do. Just get this on there, and we've got it all set up that you're able to go to wowhealthadvocates.com. There's a little video. You'll learn more information and so on. But the bottom line is it allows individuals and businesses to liberate everybody, either in their employ or as an individual, to escape from a third-party network, third-party pay, and all the rest of it, and totally take back control. And there's a lot of really neat features that you will learn about later on. So on that note, again, thanks, James, for joining us, and we'll see everybody next time.